Welcome to Sisters in Company Talking About It live show. Hosted by me, Dr. Sharon Cradle and Sherelle Higgins. We will be discussing intriguing, intricate, inspirational, informative, and intelligent topics with our individual twists and talents.
We will present real stories, real solutions, and engage in real talk.
So we invite you to be our company every Sunday afternoon at 3:00 p.m. as we focus on transcendent thinking that will move you forward. You become the company you keep.
What company do you keep? Oh yeah, we are biological sisters by way of the south side of Chicago. So get ready to keep company with us and our guests as we talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sisters in Company Talking About It live show. We are so excited to be back, and this topic is so very important. And so before we get started, you know who I am. I'm Dr. Sharon Cradle, and I am the oldest of this dynamic duo.
And I am Sherelle Higgins, and I am the favorite of this dynamic duo.
I miss her saying that. I always have to set her up so that she can say that. So you already know that we're asking you all to go to listenvisionlive.com so you can see the show in its entirety. And we really would like for you to call into the show today to talk about this important topic of mental health. The number is 833-202-8255. And this is such an important topic that we're going to talk about today that we've already decided that we're going to do a series on it because we want to make sure that we do justice, give it its justice, right? And so please make sure that you call in if you have any questions or comments. And we're going to start off with scripture. And I had quite a few scriptures I wanted to use today. I wanted to, use the one, Romans 12:2, that talk about, transforming your mind. But this is the one that I've decided on, Proverbs 3:13. And it says, blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding.
Yes.
For she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. And what that means to me is that your peace of mind is everything.
Yes.
Your mental health is worth more than money. It's worth more than anything. And so that's our point today of having this very, very important topic, is to really gain some understanding around the topic of mental health.
And you said something important, because mental health is not about your socioeconomic status.
No.
So people who have a lot of money and people who have no money and everybody in between can suffer from mental health issues.
Yes.
And so it's important for us to know that. And it's important for us to acknowledge when people have mental health issues and how do you deal with that. So we're going to talk about all of that.
Yes, with our expert.
With our expert, that's right, Dr. Paulette.
Exactly. And I saw this quote today, and it is so significant. It says, you got to train your mind to be stronger than your emotions, or else you will lose yourself every time.
I like it. Say it again.
Yes. You got to train your mind to be stronger than your emotions, or else you will lose yourself every time.
Yes.
And that ends up happening a lot. And so we're not talking about, people that got chemical imbalances and all that. That's what the expert is going to talk about. But we have to learn to train our minds, because when we talk about mental health or mental illness, all of us are just a couple seconds away from perhaps getting that diagnosis.
Yes, absolutely.
Based on some things that could happen in our lives. So we're going to have a serious conversation about this. And like Sherelle said, she's going to have some fun. But we took a break because you have got to take care of yourself. And Sherelle and I decided to take care of ourselves. So we took a break basically for the month of August to make sure that we can rejuvenate, right? Get our mental health back in line so that when we come and do this very important work, that we are where we need to be mentally, and our bodies are rested and our spirits are intact. And so that's what you have to do to take care of yourself. And I call that sometimes you just got to be selfish with yourself. And it's okay, because I think Dr. Paulette, and we're going to introduce her in a minute, you said you can't give 100% when you're not taking care of yourself 100%. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's absolutely right.
I wanted to make sure I got that right.
And you know, it's always important to, for me, I rip and run a lot.
Yes.
And I travel a lot for a lot of different reasons. And when I go on vacation, I rest. I don't need the hoopla. I don't need to stay up all night. I don't need all of that when I go on vacation, because that's truly the time that I get to rest. And I get to rest. And yesterday I was down in Richmond with my squad. And one of the things I love about being at my girlfriend's house is it's just so peaceful.
Yes.
And we're not under any pressure to do anything, to go anywhere. We just sit there and enjoy each other's company. And if you feel like you just want to go lay down, you know, that's good. Nobody's tripping. Nobody's saying, oh, what's wrong? You know, people just understand that it's important to take care of your mind. And it's so peaceful for me when I go down there. So I certainly enjoyed that yesterday. And also, when we were on our family vacation, on that cruise, I took the time to just relax.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Sit down somewhere.
Exactly.
You know, go to bed at a reasonable hour. Get up early. Just relax. Go sit out on the balcony.
Yes.
You know, not all of that staying up at the club all night, all of that. It was too much. And interestingly enough, most people don't believe that I'm an introvert, but I am. And I think most people,
we're ambiverts, but
I think most people don't know what it truly means to be an introvert, and it just simply means where you get your energy from.
Yes, it does.
And I get my energy from myself, and I found myself lately being extremely exhausted mentally when I get home from work, just because there's so much going on and so many people are vying for my attention all throughout the day that by the time I get home, I'm just completely exhausted. And so it's so good for me to take the time to step back and say, I have nothing to give to you. I can't help you solve your problems because I'm about to solve my own, which is exhaustion.
Exactly. And I love when Sherelle talked about peace, because, you know, so many of us and people that have mental health, how I would imagine it is that they're in pieces. And so from pieces to peace, you know, that's where you want to get to, from those pieces to having some type of peace of mind. And most of you all know that I I have 2 journals, and my second journal is called Mind Your Mind, # think about it, right? Mastering your state of mind. And it's it's art. It's an art to it, right? And you have to practice it. And how do you practice that? You know, by removing some negativity. You know, being very careful and cautious who you let in your space, the types of conversations that you have. And my friends know I cut things off when it comes to certain conversations, because it's not doing me any good. It's not bringing any peace in my life. And if it's not going to help me and I can't solve the problem, I just really don't want to talk about it, to be very honest with you. And so from pieces to pieces. And the other journal, the hashtag is the Dr. SDC Structure Journal, is shift your mindset and the view will change. Because if you shift your mindset around things, and I think this is what this particular quote, I'm not sure who wrote it, is talking about, you know, that you got to train your mind to be stronger than your emotions, because so many of us, you know, we respond based on emotions and react and think based on emotions versus really just taking a couple deep breaths and thinking about what's really ahead of us and what we're really dealing with. And so I think this conversation is going to be powerful. We're going to do it in segments because it's so much to talk about. And so and we're gonna do it respectfully, because because there's a lot of people struggling. And so before we get into the statistics and the data, we want to introduce our expert. Unless Sherelle, you want to say something else?
I just want to say one other thing. Over the summer, I also attended my 35th high school class reunion in the city of Chicago. And it was everything. It was really good to get. I mean, we usually do something every year for all classes, but this year it was just isolated to the class of '84, and it was just great get back and really reconnect with people. And I was surprised to learn that one of my classmates lived down in Waldorf.
Oh, really?
And so,
oh, wow.
so, had I not gone to the class reunion, I would know these things.
That's exactly
and
right.
just reconnecting with people is just awesome. And so we're all now connected on Facebook as well. So it was a wonderful event. Shout out to the committee who did that. And so I just wanted to bring that up.
And so we pray that everyone had a great summer. Time flies. So whatever your goals are, go ahead and do it. Because time waits for no one. That's the truest statement. And so, live your life. I love that, people are saying I'm living my best life. That's exactly right. You get to decide that. And so I hope everyone had a wonderful summer. So let's introduce our guests, because I don't like to talk about topics that I don't really have any expertise on. I have some knowledge about it because of my training, but I don't have any real expertise. So we have the wonderful Dr. Paulette Hubbard on our show to help us, have an engaged and an intelligent conversation around the topic of mental health. And so we're going to ask Dr. Paulette to introduce herself to our audience. Welcome, Dr. Paulette.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you all for having me on this show. I met you guys several months ago, and you talked about having me on the show. I was like, when are they going to call? When are they going to call?
Yeah. Yes.
As you know, as she already said, I'm Dr. Paulette Hubbard. My passion is mental health. I have a private practice. My practice is Inspired Wholeness. And it's interesting that you talked about in the beginning how you had to take a mental break.
Yes.
Because my theme and my mission in life is teaching people about mind, body, and soul.
Yes.
And that mind, body, and soul connection.
Yes.
Because when one thing is out of balance, everything is out of balance. And so it's so important. But in my private practice, introduce myself. That's where it's
so
like
Inspired Wholeness, and you're located?
I'm located, my office is located in Stafford.
Stafford,
Virginia. So when you, in introducing myself, as I said, I'm a licensed therapist, a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also a retired Marine.
Yes, thank you for your service.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Yes.
I'm also an author. I have 2 books.
Yes.
All That I Am to Be, that I wrote around 2006, 2007. And then my latest creation is Breathe.
Breathe. I love that.
Just a touch about Breathe.
Yes.
Breathe is actually a psychological thriller. It's a page turner, and that's not me saying that. That's what people have.
And I have my autograph copy.
Dr. Paulette, it's okay on this show, girl.
Brag
if
about
you want to say
yourself.
your book is a page turner,
That's exactly right.
We won't even think you being vain or not, because that's just what we do on this show.
I wrote it that way. I wrote it to be a page turner, but what the whole purpose, the setting of the book is, it's teaching people about trauma.
Yes.
And how trauma manifests.
Yes.
How it manifests, and how you can experience it. But Nisi is the main character in my book. And with Nisi, she experienced some trauma when she was young. And she doesn't remember, because that's one of the effects. And I'm sure we're going to talk about trauma.
Right.
That's one of the effects that trauma can have on an individual. You can totally block the memory.
Right.
So she doesn't remember it. She goes through this host of things. There's somebody that gets killed. It's a psychological thriller. That's all I can say is go get the book.
Exactly. And so where did you go to school? Where did you get your PhD and all of that?
Got to give a shout out to HU. I got my PhD.
Which one?
Howard,
Which one?
HU.
Oh,
Howard University,
Okay.
across
All
the
right.
street.
You know.
All right.
Across the street. The only one.
Yes. And your PhD is in
social work.
Social work.
But I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So,
Correct.
So my training is in clinical therapy.
correct. Wonderful. And so we're going to segment these conversations, and I know that at some point when we come back for another show, we're going to talk about children. But today, we just want to get a general understanding of this topic, right? About what it is, the stigma around it, and making sure that we have a foundation so that when we go, further and deeper into the conversation, we already have set the foundation.
Right.
And so let's talk about mental illness. I called it mental health, but mental illness, right? What's the medical definition of that?
When someone has a challenge, this is my definition. When someone has a challenge or a mental disorder that prevents them from living a sustainable lifestyle,
Okay.
a consistent, sustainable, where they have problems that are constantly intruding and causing dysfunction in their life.
Right, and one of the things I'm aware of is the DSM-4. So can you talk about? I mean,
We're on
just
the
I
5.
know we're on the
We're on
level
the
5.
DSM-5 now.
Yeah, DSM-5. So we're on the DSM-5. This is a diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders, and it's out there, right, for people to access to kind of understand.
So the DSM-5 or the DSM is we're on 5 now.
Right.
The DSM is actually for clinical personnel.
Okay.
So all psychiatrists, psychologists, any type of therapist, that is like our go-to Bible for mental health diagnoses. I would not recommend that you just go to the DSM
And try to figure it out.
Don't ever
what's
self-diagnose.
Right, please
And
don't
under any
self-diagnose.
circumstances, don't
Yeah.
ever self-diagnose.
I mean, anyone can purchase it, but it's our clinical Bible too. And there's over 200 mental health diagnoses.
Over 200.
Over 200.
Wow.
And that's
Did you
another
all know
reason
that?
why.
So-
Over 200.
Let's before we get into this really deep, let's talk about the most common ones that people are familiar with,
Okay.
the groups of mental illnesses, because people will then be able to relate and either see it in themselves or see it in somebody that's within their circle.
So depression,
Yes.
anxiety, bipolar, and I hope we touch on bipolar.
Yes.
because
We
it
will.
drives
Oh,
me crazy
absolutely.
to hear somebody say,
Yeah.
"Oh, they just bipolar."
Just bipolar.
Yeah, just bipolar. Depression, anxiety, and bipolar, and I just lost my
PTSD.
PTSD or trauma.
Or trauma in
because
general.
Because there's a difference between post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic
Stress disorder. Okay,
So
got it.
those are the primary ones but there are a lot of also personality disorders.
That's
that
right.
We do not have time to get
Right.
into.
Yeah,
And
personality
not to mention
disorders.
the eating disorders,
Yeah,
right?
Right.
and the eating
Right.
disorders. There, so remember the DSM-5 has over 200 diagnoses, and all of those that we mentioned and we haven't mentioned fall. There's phobias.
Right.
That people have phobias, all different types of.
I have a
some
phobia
strange.
to cats.
There's fetishes. Yeah.
Right,
there-
fetishes.
There's fetishes. So all of those are encompassed and fall under the DSM.
So my phobia to cats is a mental illness.
Not a necessarily.
Oh.
Not
I was
a
gonna
mental
embrace
illness.
it.
No, it's no, it's
I was
not.
gonna embrace it because it's deep.
It's not a mental illness, but it does fall under the DSM-5. It would probably fall under the criteria for a phobia.
Okay.
And then you could get treatment for that.
Oh,
There's
okay.
ways to eradicate phobias.
Yeah.
certain
Oh,
phobias.
okay.
Yes. And so the reason I wanted to bring up the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders is because, like she said, therapists, medical professionals, they go to that particular manual to really kind of see what the characteristics are and what you're displaying. And sometimes, that's why she doesn't want people just going to it, don't recommend that, because sometimes you may exhibit certain characteristics, but not all of them, right?
Or you may have symptoms of one that overlap with something else.
Exactly. And that's why you need a
it's so
professional
important.
to really guide you through that. And so let me give you all some data. In the United States of America, and this is as of some data I saw from this year, 46% of Americans will experience mental illness during their lifetime.
Wow.
5% of adults, no, 50, is it 59? Or 5% of adults 18 or over experience mental illness in any given year, which is equivalent to 43% or 43 million people. So in other words, 1/3 of the population is going to experience some type of mental health challenge in their lifetime. And so is that correct? Because I looked it up. I want to make sure that's correct.
Yes, absolutely.
And one of the most common ones that we did not mention that people don't necessarily connect to mental illness is substance abuse.
Well,
Substance abuse isn't necessarily a mental health illness,
Right.
but they're usually self-medicating
Correct.
as a result of
exactly.
something that they're not dealing with or a mental illness.
Okay.
So let's talk about the difference between someone who has a DSM-5 diagnosis or somebody that's just having a bad day. So
Okay.
can you talk, because it's a spectrum, right?
Okay.
And how they
Yes.
can be connected.
Absolutely. But let me first say that two things that, because when we talk about stigma, let me first say
Yes.
that old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's a lie.
It is a lie.
Or
Words are powerful.
Time
Heals all wounds.
That's a lie.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the spectrum of depression as an example, someone that may be sad as opposed to someone that may be experiencing depression.
Right.
Let me first say that there's different types of depression and there's different levels of depression. So that's why it's so important, if you are someone that is experiencing depression, as we talk about the symptoms, that you go seek help. So with sadness, that's something, usually sadness occurs because of a result of an experience. Something
Right.
happened that maybe didn't go your way, or even to the point of grief,
Yep.
where you lose someone. And grief isn't just death. Grief can be a
Right.
loss of a relationship,
Yes.
a family, a divorce, those different types of losses, a friend that cause you to be sad. The sadness may occur, and you may have some experiences of crying and isolated and so forth, but it doesn't last.
And let's get this out the way. People say people who are acting different, don't act like you, maybe experience some type of mental health, that they crazy. And I already told you that boils my blood, because I'm thinking to myself, those of us who don't have a mental health diagnosis yet, for us to say that about someone else who's obviously going through something traumatic, I don't understand that. So let's talk about that.
Well, let's talk about how you define normal.
Yeah,
let's-
exactly.
Yeah.
Let's define normal.
Exactly.
And let's define crazy.
And then we can define crazy.
Right.
Because I don't have no issues with using the word crazy, because I've seen some crazy people in my day.
Well, but it's on that spectrum of how do you define normal.
Right.
Your normal may not be my normal.
Right, exactly.
Correct.
So back to what you were saying, just because your normal isn't my normal doesn't mean there's something wrong with me necessarily.
But I'm talking about
sometimes
people
there
who
is.
have. But that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people that that they have a mental health diagnosis, and people just say, well, they're just crazy, and it boils my blood, because I don't get it. I don't get how we can put that kind of judgment on people who are obviously suffering.
I think it goes
But most people, a lot of times people don't know that others have been diagnosed with a mental health issues. They just know that this person is acting out of character or is acting outside the norm.
Right.
And so, the quickest word we have in our vocabulary to explain to somebody else is crazy. And like I said, I've seen some crazy people. I've seen them act crazy. I don't know if they had a mental health diagnosis or not. But, sometimes people be tripping and they act crazy.
And they don't necessarily need a mental. Sometimes people don't.
Right.
Most often they don't have a mental health
That's right.
diagnosis, but they may be having some mental health
Challenges,
I like to
exactly.
call them challenges.
They are.
Right,
They
right.
are.
That-
They're
but-
challenges.
So it just depends. But I think that lends to education and awareness.
Yes.
And understanding what's really happening, as opposed to just labeling them and then going on. So we see that a lot.
And so sad could be that you've had a life experience and there's some grief, lost a job, divorce,
Right. Or disappointment.
disappointment, and so
that kind of thing. And you may cry.
Right.
You might get a little sad. You might withdraw. But you come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
When we start looking at it becoming for a possible meeting criteria for depression, it lasts more than 2 weeks. It's consistent and ongoing. It lasts more than 2 weeks. And then they start to down spiral. So, you'll see the crying, the irritability, lack of concentration, difficulty remembering, loss of appetite, a lot of sleeping, excessive sleeping, or not sleeping at all. All of those are things that we then start as professionals when we're looking to meet criteria for diagnosis. Those are the kind of things that we're looking at, and we're getting a history.
And what about
Sherelle lashing
said?
out?
Yeah,
Lashing out also, and
Yeah.
and that's a great point,
Right.
especially for men. Men have been found to express, they may be depressed, but they express it through anger.
Yes.
So that is definitely, and we found that to be more prevalent with men than, so not saying that women don't, but more prevalent with men that they express it
But
through
Sherelle
anger.
talked about self-medicating or some type of drug addiction, and so is that a possible symptom when you start seeing people?
Absolutely. When you see somebody, especially, now sometimes it's gradual.
Yes.
But especially if you see somebody all of a sudden they hardly ever drink, and now every time you see them they're drunk. Something's happened. Something somewhere, or drugs. Something somewhere along the way has happened, and it could be a series of things, or it could be that one thing that caused them to find. And what they're looking for is relief. I mean, if you've ever had a drink, you know that you know the feeling, that euphoria you get, and so they figure out that, oh, this helps me at least forget about whatever the situation is in that moment.
Yes.
And then they start seeking it, and they seek it, and next thing they know, they're in the throes of an addiction.
So, Dr. Paulette, why mental health as a passion and a profession for you?
Human behavior has always just
human
fascinated me.
It is fascinating.
Human behavior fascinates me.
Yes.
And because I'm also an introvert, people don't believe I'm introvert either. Yes. And so I love that you brought that up, because introversion is, you, like you said, you go inward for your energy, where extroverts, they seek outside sources. So an example would be a litmus test. What would you prefer to be doing on a Saturday night? Would you rather be at home reading a book or watching a good movie? Or would you rather be out at a party? Correct. That will help you to figure out.
Well, then that's why people
where
don't
you
believe me, because I be out at the party.
but I'm not saying you don't do that.
But here's the thing about me: I only go to parties where I know the people who are giving the party, or I know majority of the people who will be at the party. If you drop me into a party and I don't know anybody, I won't talk to a soul. And I would leave there and not know anybody. Like on the cruise, I met 3 people. My two sisters, they knew everybody on the cruise.
Yeah, they did.
But that's how I've developed the passion, because I'm an introvert, and so like you said, if I'm in a big crowd, I'll just sit back and watch people. And I'm perfectly fine. I'm not lonely. I'm not bored. I sit back and just watch, and so that's how it became my passion for.
So for sadness, it's short-lived, but when you said 2 weeks, I found that
more than 2 weeks.
More than 2 weeks for depression.
For us to start looking at it the possibility
as depression,
for meeting criteria for depression.
And so, what do you mostly see in your practice? What's the prominent mental health challenge?
I specialize in trauma.
Okay.
So, especially with me being a vet myself, I work with a lot of vets. So I specialize in trauma, depression, and anxiety, but I also do deal with eating disorders and substance abuse.
So what about ADD and ADHD?
What about it?
Are those considered mental?
Yes.
Okay.
And they're diagnosable, and you can receive medication for them and so forth. And here's my thing: some medical professionals are not gonna like me for saying this, especially for children.
Yes.
Take your child to a mental health professional to get that diagnosis. I've seen a lot of children. I've seen a lot of children. And I'm not. Please don't get me wrong.
Instead of what, Sharon?
A medical doctor.
Instead of a medical doctor,
pediatrician.
They take them to and I'm not saying there are some pediatricians that are trained in it, but you need to be asking those questions, because I've seen children that are put on the medication and they shouldn't have been. There were other things going on that they never get referred. Or if your pediatrician is going to prescribe the medication, they should also be recommending that you go to a therapist, because there could be other issues going on.
Exactly.
Whereas those symptoms are manifesting as ADHD or ADD, and that's not the issue. So that's why, like I said, medical professionals ain't gonna like me for saying that.
Oh, that's okay, but I think it's true.
Right.
Because being a former, still an educator, but when I was in the K-12 world, absolutely, they would take the child to the pediatrician, and they would come back, and they would be on these medications.
Yeah. So
and so I understand that.
And so let's use that. Let's for an example, a child that is growing up in a violent home, or they're coming to school hungry, not fed, they don't have problems concentrating.
Exactly.
So now you take them to the pediatrician and they get on medication and you haven't addressed the issue.
Exactly.
So those are the kind of, that's why I'm saying, it's important to make sure that when we have a sinus problem or we go to the eye doctor, they're specialists.
That's
for the
right.
eyes,
We go
they're specialists
exactly.
for the heart.
Exactly.
When you have other specialized medical issues, there are specialists that you go to address those issues, and I really would like to see people start taking that approach with their mental illness.
And so you specialize in trauma, depression, and anxiety, and I can imagine that these three diagnoses show up differently in each person, right?
Absolutely.
So in terms of a general definition of depression, trauma, and anxiety, so that our audience can have the foundation.
Okay, so with depression, we're looking at symptoms that I already talked about: irritability, lack of concentration, excessive sleep or not sleeping at all, loss of appetite or appetite changes, weight loss sometimes, unexplained weight loss, difficulty concentrating. Those are some of general. And then the sadness, sometimes crying spells.
Yes.
And then that feeling of sadness, and sometimes the sadness moves into hopelessness.
Yes.
Those are kind, and I often hear patients describe depression as being in this black hole where they just don't. It's just like blah. They just don't see their way out.
Can't see their way out.
So those are the general things that we start to look for when we're trying to determine if there's a depression. But like I said before, there's different levels of depression.
Right.
And there's different types of depression.
Right. What about anxiety? Because we know that I've seen in the news, in the media, that with these polls being done, these surveys being done, that since Trump has been in office, Americans' anxiety levels are up.
Yes, therapists across the country, where our clientele has skyrocketed because of the anxiety. So anxiety feels it starts with stress. So if you've experienced a high level of stress, then you have a barometer for what anxiety feels like.
Yes.
But anxiety can increase to your heart palpitations. The emergency room sees people often for.
Or they say panic attack.
Well, there's a panic attack.
Yeah, panic
That's why
attack.
I was going with the emergency room sees people in the emergency room for heart attacks, but it turns out they're having a panic attack. So it can lead to that. Also with anxiety, that extra energy, energy that you feel with stress, but it's increased tenfold by not being able to settle down, mind racing, thoughts all over the place. Those are kind of things.
And they can't, they can't breathe. They can't, exactly.
Sometimes they can't. If it gets to that level, they have difficulty breathing.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And then the trauma.
Wow. Trauma,
I know you wanted to talk about that.
Let me just say, first of all, trauma is very subjective.
Okay.
The three of us can have the same experience, and it can impact us in different ways.
Right.
Where it may not bother me at all,
right.
It may impact you to some extent, where it may develop into full-blown PTSD for somebody else.
Can we spend some time there? Because
sure.
I think you just said something that's profound. We as people, we often say, well, I went through the same thing and I didn't have any impact. It didn't impact me. And I'm thinking, well, you're not me.
Right.
And so say what you just said again, because I think that is important for people to understand. Just because you had a similar, because it wasn't the same, you had a similar experience and you did not react that way, doesn't mean that the person that reacted that way shouldn't have reacted that way.
Right.
And it can be the same. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It can be the same experience. Let's say the three of us, heaven forbid, the three of us are in a car accident together. So we all experience the same car accident.
Yes.
It can still impact us
differently.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And so, Sharon, to your point, what I say to people now is stop looking for you and other people.
Yeah. Oh,
Right.
I love that.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Stop looking for you
And
to
putting
show
those
up.
labels.
Stop looking
Can
for
I-
you to show up.
Can I say this though? But I think my main point is that it's the judgment.
Right.
It's a judgment. It's a label, and I'm thinking, we don't know how we will respond if we had to experience some things that people have gone through.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so I think we just have to be a little more understanding. That's what this is about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
kind of understanding. And no, you don't have to know the answers or
Right.
you know every detail. But when someone is experiencing some high levels of anxiety, they've experienced some trauma, you know, I don't think it's appropriate that I say, well, you know, I was in a car accident and nothing happened to me.
Right,
You know, I didn't.
exactly.
You know, what's wrong with you? I I see that a lot.
all the time.
And trauma could be a lot of different things.
Yes, it
Absolutely.
can.
And people
Yes.
need to understand that trauma
Yes.
doesn't necessarily have to be the most extreme thing
Absolutely.
in order for it to be called trauma.
Exactly.
And so, to Sharon's point, I think, you know, most people on this planet have experienced some sort of trauma. And, you know, thank goodness that we all don't have the same reaction to the trauma, or the trauma doesn't impact us all the same. Because this world would be, that C word Sharon don't like, would be crazy.
Exactly. And to my point of trauma being subjective, and
Right.
and it's based on how you experience a situation or have an experience, and
Correct.
it's that overwhelming response to that experience
Right.
Exactly.
that then creates the trauma.
Exactly.
And then there's post traumatic stress. So let's say you were in a car accident, or you've experienced a natural disaster, or whatever the case may be. It doesn't have to be war. A lot of times, trauma PTSD
That's
is
gonna
associated with that. So,
Right.
okay, so I'll hold on that.
Okay.
And
So it's PTS and
and
there's
PTSD,
PTSD.
right.
Okay.
So PTS, post-traumatic stress, is you've had an experience that was overwhelming, a shock to the system, is
Yeah.
how I like to explain it. And you have some behaviors, or you responded to that over a course of, you know, a few weeks, but it goes away.
Okay.
So, but post-traumatic stress disorder, that post-traumatic stress, for some reason, it didn't process in the brain the way that it needed to process. And so then you start having intrusive thoughts, nightmares, you're hypervigilant, irritable, angry. There are a whole lot of symptoms, and that sleep deprivation sometimes plays a role into that. So there are a lot of different things that then constitute as post-traumatic stress disorder, and it happens for over more than 30 days. It you know, it's a constant replay of whatever it is that's happening.
And so you being a behaviorist, and I'm a behaviorist, and this is one of the things I say all the time when somebody tells me that somebody did something. I said there's an antecedent to behavior.
Absolutely.
People just don't wake up and just decide.
All behavior is purposeful.
All of it, and so I you know, I always talk about the iceberg. You know, it's all, you
Yes.
know, we see what we see on the top, but there's all that stuff lurking underneath that people don't necessarily get control
Absolutely.
of, and then you just start seeing all of these peculiar, violent, destructive behaviors sometimes.
So let's talk about how suicide plays a role in all of this, and how, you know, when people are suffering from mental illness, it can lead to suicide.
Absolutely.
I was reading an article about the farmers who
Yes.
are committing suicides at an accelerated rate because of this trade war with China, and you know, it's impacting their ability to make money for their families, and therefore they can't get the credit that they normally would get from the banks, and now the banks are foreclosing on their properties, and so all of this is creating
that
this-
hopelessness and that black hole.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes.
And they are taking their own lives because
Yes.
of it.
Yes, and the thing about suicide, a couple things are there's not always signs that somebody's about to commit suicide, but a lot of times there are signs that they're all of a sudden they get better. Let's say they've been in this depression,
yes.
and then all of a sudden they get better, and they
Yes.
start socializing, and they start going around and visiting everybody and saying, you know, saying goodbye.
Yeah.
You know, the cliche stuff, giving away stuff,
Yes.
making sure things are in order. You need to pay attention to that kind of stuff. And,
Yes.
and the one thing I
Yes.
can't say enough is, if you think someone is suicidal, ask them. Ask them, are they thinking about taking their life? And if they say yes, ask them, do they have a plan? And if they say yes to either one of those, then you need to get them to the emergency room. And
Yes.
however you need to get them. If they won't get in the car, then you dial 911 and have them, 911 and have somebody come take them. But it's so, a lot of times I hear, when I do suicide trainings, I hear people will say, well, if I ask them, that might give them the ideal. No, if they're thinking about it, trust me, you haven't given them any thoughts or any ideals, you may actually be saving their lives.
And I know, and it's so interesting that you said that, because I know two situations, two young women, they were in their 20s, was having some mental health challenges. And, so the parents got them some help, right? And when they got home, after a while, the parents were like, well, you look like you're doing well today. And they was like, I feel good today. I am wonderful. One got on the bike right after the parents asked, rode up to a railroad track, stopped on the railroad track, and the train
And you know
killed
why
her.
she was feeling wonderful? Because she had made the decision.
She had made the decision.
She had
And
made the
another
decision
one
to do
and
it.
another one hung herself at the parents' house underneath their deck. And it was the same conversation. So the families that I know, it's that same conversation. And I didn't associate it with what you just said, that sometimes when they say, oh, I feel good today, I'm wonderful, I'm going to go and do this, they probably have made up their mind that they're going to go ahead and take their lives.
I read a
that's
a post
interesting.
on Facebook a couple days ago where a guy was saying his goodbyes and asking family members to take care of his kids and all of this stuff, and it was a suicide note, and then he committed suicide. And I was just thinking, like, what a way for your family to have to deal with that,
Right.
in such a public way.
Yes.
And people, there's a stigma associated with somebody committing suicide.
Oh, they're weak.
Right.
They're weak.
Well, not only that, but for the family.
And for the family,
too.
for the
Yeah,
family,
exactly.
too. Yeah, what
You
was
know?
happening? What was going on with that?
Yeah,
Exactly.
And the
But when
family don't want to talk about it because they somehow feel like they should have known, or it's their fault,
And
or
it's
they
not
could have done
always.
something.
And the
Yeah, not
stigma
always.
really is around mental illness.
Yes,
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And that stigma that you're weak.
Right.
You're weak if you ask for help, or you're weak if you admit that you have a problem. You're weak. Well, I
Right.
don't even know how you define that.
Exactly.
As weak, but you're weak.
And you have, I just believe, I like to communicate. I like to talk about how I feel about stuff. I like to write it down. I like to talk about it because I just believe, and I know this is not our conversation, but I believe that so much of that stuff is sickness. It creates sickness in your body because we're
Absolutely.
carrying so much
Yes.
pressure and so much stress. And so, I'm trying to make sure that I release as much of that as
that is a
possible and
great
talk
way.
about that stuff.
Right.
Because if you don't, next thing you know, I could be sitting in a therapist chair, and that would nothing be wrong with that if that's what I needed to do. But so many people, and let's talk about this stigma of mental health in our community. Do you have a general sense of where that came from? Why in our particular people it's such a
Because
big
people
deal?
didn't want to be called
Well, I mean,
crazy.
it's
Well, people didn't want to be called crazy. I mean, it's like you said, lack of education. Lack of education.
Well, let's talk about society at whole, as a whole, and the messages that they send. You can't be weak. Men don't cry. All of those different things that are attached to this. And then within our community, our folks that have been exploited in so many different ways. You look at Henrietta Lacks, you look at the
Yes.
Tuskegee experiment.
Yes.
Those type of
Yes.
things that have happened that have caused major
Distrust. Major distrust.
amongst, for us, specifically in our community, that we don't seek help elsewhere. You don't talk about what goes
Right.
on.
In
That's
the
part of our
house.
culture. You
What
don't
happens
talk
in
about
this
what
house
happens.
stays
What
in the
happens
house.
in the house stays in the house. And so all of those things, I think, are a culmination of why we don't seek services. And then back to lack of understanding,
Right.
the awareness. And I'll give you an example. I had a client that I was seeing her for some issues, and she was telling me about her daughter was cutting.
Yes.
And I said, wait a minute.
Yes.
And I said, what do you mean she's cutting? And so she's like, oh, she doing that white girl stuff, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my, I almost lost it. I was like, oh my God, stop. I forgot about why we stopped talking about why she was even there. I was like, let's, so I had to educate her on what that was all about, and then we got her daughter help. But it's, not understanding and wanting to label certain things, or we don't think certain things impact our culture
Right.
in the way, and they may not impact us in the way that it may impact another culture, but it's still there.
And I know we talked about children, and we're going to deal with that later, because so much of these experiences can happen in childhood.
Absolutely.
Because children are traumatized.
Right. And then those memories are locked in.
Exactly. And people
and the
like
kids are crazy.
and so that's what people say. And so
And they
and the kids, start acting out behaviorally because they don't necessarily have the words,
Right.
or they shared. When I saw the movie Precious, the conversation around that movie disturbed me. And I from a behavior standpoint, I understand people just don't know what to do or what to say, and people are like, that just can't happen. That can't be real. And I'm like, well, yeah, it is, and it's some worse situations,
Absolutely.
right? And so then these things happen to children, and then they grow up to be adults, and they've been carrying it for so long. Then all of a sudden, you see what can happen when children are not validated, but and taken care of, when there's trauma in their lives. And so and it manifests, like you said, it manifests itself in promiscuity. I mean, just all
Substance abuse,
all kinds
kind of behavioral
bullying.
problems.
I mean, all kinds of things.
Yeah, and there's actually been studies to show the differences in brain growth.
Yes, absolutely.
When children are in experience trauma, or there's complex
Right.
trauma that occurs, that their brain doesn't grow at the rate that it should, and then it affects their cognitive ability, their
Right.
ability to remember and memorize things, within carries over into school, and not being able to perform effectively in school.
That's
so
exactly
it can
right.
have all type of consequences.
And what about the caregivers?
Yes.
They are often forgotten. They are
Yes.
often untalked about, and they struggle a lot with dealing with a family member. Particularly when it's a child having to take care of a parent with a mental illness.
Yes.
Or vice versa, right? A parent taking care of a child with mental illness. Like, when do you draw the line and say, this is more than I can handle?
Right.
And I need to make different decisions, because usually when we do that as parents, we then get judged that, we haven't taking care of our child adequately, right? And so we put them off to some place that the people are trained to deal with that mental illness, and it's not easy. Right. And so as a caregiver, I think it's important that we don't lose them in the process.
That's a great
Can I
point.
add something? I have a friend who mom, when he was born, mom was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So that's all he knew. And back then, they had the mom in the house, right? And the father was the custodial, right? And so now, the mother and the father are deceased, and the young man, was experiencing great depression. And I was talking to someone very close, and they were like, it was just hard. It's hard as a caregiver to understand it and to watch it. And I think the frustration sets in because you want the person to be better, right? And you don't know what to do. Right. And sometimes they self-destruct. They don't want to go get the help, but they don't want to go get the help maybe for a lot of reasons. Can you talk about that? What the struggle is once they realize they have this mental health diagnosis and they get to the point where, okay, I'm gonna get some help. What are some of the challenges with them going full circle in their whole treatment approach?
To get help?
Yep.
First is access.
Yep.
Sometimes, lack of access, especially if you're in a rural community or you don't have mental health insurance, people are under the impression that they can't get help. But there are community,
right.
I know in Virginia, I'm not sure about it, particularly in D.C., but in Virginia, each county has a community services board where they provide mental health services or resources for mental health services. And so
it's called a community services board.
Community service board, where where they provide, or they'll help you find resources for help.
Right.
So there's different ways and different avenues. There's also support groups that you can
for
can
both.
go to both, for the caregiver
Right.
and the individual that may be. Now, some, depending on the type of mental health illness you're dealing with, you might have to look a little harder, but there's support groups out there for individuals that are dealing with that. Also, we keep talking about coming back to the stigma thing.
The stigma,
that
yes.
it's not okay to ask for help for whatever reason, whether it's cultural, whether it's you and the shame. Some people carry a lot of shame and guilt around asking for help.
Right.
When it comes to because for somewhere along the line they learned that wasn't okay to ask for help. So there are a lot of different issues that come into play in terms of trying to find convincing someone, even when they know that they need services, to go and get services.
Exactly.
And for some, they think they can deal with it themselves.
Yes, they do.
may
A lot
know,
of them.
but they may think they can deal with it themselves. And then we have issues. I have issues with clients not taking medication as prescribed.
Yes. Taking
Now,
it as prescribed.
as
Right.
prescribed.
Exactly.
I've had clients take themselves off the medication. Some because they think they're getting better. Others because they for some whatever reason they come to the conclusion that they don't need it anymore.
Right.
And then some just struggle with the ideal of taking a medication. I'm not a medication person either. I don't take it unless I absolutely have to. But what I explain to some clients, now some clients they're just going to be on medication lifelong because they have a disorder that just warrant, if there's a chemical imbalance, it may warrant
Right.
medication lifelong. But for
So for you as a therapist, you see the clients. So at what part of the process in therapy do you see them? Because I'm thinking when you're talking about the medication, psychiatrists are really the only ones that can
prescribe medication, or their primary care physician.
Okay.
So it happens both ways. Sometimes I get referrals from the psychiatrists or the primary care physicians, or other times I'll refer them.
Oh, you'll refer them.
I'll
Okay.
refer them for medication.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
have that conversation about them. Sometimes it's medication is to help. They're here at point A and they're trying to get to point B.
Right.
And so I describe it as medication is like a bridge. It's no different than if you had surgery and you have to take pain medication until you heal and feel better and you can function on your own.
Right.
That's how I explain for some when they struggle with that ideal of taking medication. It's that bridge
Yes.
to help you get to where you're trying to get to mentally.
So of course this time is running really quickly, but before we do that, I'm gonna throw out a word to you, and I want you to talk about this word because this word became popular over the last probably 20 years, and I don't think people really know what it is, but people use it a lot.
I hope I know what it is.
You know what it is?
5 minutes.
Bipolar.
I'm so glad you touched that. I know you don't like the word crazy, but it drives me crazy. When I hear, because somebody is experiencing a mood swing or something, and she's bipolar, he bipolar. Do you even really understand what you're speaking onto that person? Because with bipolar, there's different types of bipolar diagnoses, but the general broad theme of bipolar is that you have severe highs and lows.
Right. Yes.
And so the severe lows are depression, which can result in major depressive, sometimes even leading to being suicidal or suicide, to mania.
Mania.
And if you've ever dealt with somebody that is manic,
manic, yes.
you will stop assuming everybody because they're having a mood shift is bipolar. That mania, they become grandiose.
Yep.
A lot of times acting out, they do excessive spending, or reckless type of, driving. Those reckless types of behaviors come into play. All of those things that manic, when they're in that manic phase, and then when they start to come down, they may seem even normal for a while. It just depends. Some rapid cycle and some don't cycle very rapidly. So that's why, and like I said, there's different levels and different types of bipolar. But just because
it's very extreme,
right? It can be
from one extreme
it
to
can
the
be
next.
very extreme.
Yes.
So just because somebody's having a bad day, or they may be going through a period in their life where they're having a rough time with something and they're struggling with dealing with it, does not mean they are bipolar. So I'm so glad.
Right.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I just cringe when I hear somebody say, "Oh, they're bipolar."
And they have to have that diagnosis.
Yes,
and,
absolutely. And there's different, like I said, there's different types.
Different types.
And
Absolutely.
so you have to go to a professional to actually, and there's medication that people can take for bipolar, along with therapy. Therapy is always recommended.
And I think that's what we're going to talk about in our next session, is about this holistic approach. But I'm thinking about the people that are self-medicating. I can only imagine that you have to deal with that part too.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. You got to get them through that. You got to get them to understand that this is. This diagnosis, this is why you're having these challenges, and then get them through that so that they can get to the next level of care.
And somebody that is using substance abuse, we even hesitate on diagnosing until we get them sober or clean.
Right.
Because we don't know if that's the drug that's causing those behaviors to manifest, or if there's a disorder behind the use of the drugs.
Okay. And I know one of the things that we want to talk about in our next conversation, and you mentioned this earlier, you talked about PTSD and the connection with sleep apnea.
Oh, yeah.
And so I want to make sure.
Well, no, not PTSD, depression.
Depression and sleep.
Or just that holistic approach and the importance of understanding how the physical and the mental works together.
Yes. Wow. We told you all that this particular topic is heavy, and it's just a lot to it, and we wanted to make sure that we had a deep conversation about it because we know that in our community it is real, and it's prevalent, and we need to make sure that we are doing better by ourselves, to better take care of our mental health, our physical health, and our spiritual health so that we can be better able to support people who are having these challenges and getting the right information so that we can know where to refer them. Yes. And I think that's really the key.
Speaking of referral, can I give my website?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. My website is www.PauletteHubbard, and Hubbard is HUBBERT.com, or you can email me at Paulette@PauletteHubbard.com.
Yes, and Paulette, Dr. Paulette, we haven't checked with her about next Sunday, but
wait, we can't do next Sunday. We got a different topic and a different guest next Sunday, but the following Sunday, that would be the 22nd.
I'm here,
and we'll have her back the 22nd. And so, if there's anything that you all want us to touch on, please send us some comments, and we'll make sure that we include those comments and those topics in our next discussion. But I think we're going to have to talk about this whole, the mental and the health piece of this connection to mental health challenges.
And if you heard anything on this show, and you know that it relates to you, please reach out and get some help.
Right.
Don't worry about the stigma. Don't worry about what people are going to say about you. You would rather them say that you're healthy and you're on the right path than for them to say that you committed suicide because you didn't get the help. So if you heard anything on here that you can that resonates with you, please get some help and make sure that you take care of your mind, your body, and your soul.
Right, and getting understanding is the key. Right, because it's just your mind is worth more than anything that you can possibly have in possessions in this life. And so let's make sure we're taking care of our mind health as well. Thank you all. We're so glad to be back. Thank you all for tuning in. We missed you guys. And tune in next Sunday because we're going to have another phenomenal guest on next Sunday.
Yes.
Thank you for
Thank you for coming. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll have you back on the 22nd.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I will be here.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
All right, Facebook. Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Welcome to Sisters in Company Talking About It live show.